So hi there. Thank you very much for coming. This is the Regenerative Agriculture webinar for Organic Week 2021. I'm Kim De Lallo, Member Relations and Business Development Manager here at Canada Organic Trade Association. So I'll be moderating the talk today. So just as I mentioned before, the session is being recorded and it will be available on the Canada Organic Trade Association YouTube channel as of tomorrow. So thanks a lot for joining us today. So as we begin our session today, the Canada Organic Trade Association acknowledges that our offices located in Ottawa are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Thank you for joining us, and so let's move on to the session. So we have many wonderful sponsors, so thanks for putting that up there. In particular, CODA would like to thank our top national sponsors, Seeds of Change, Savour, L'Ancêtre, Yorkshire Valley, and as you can see below, there are many sponsors who've helped to make this Organic Week possible, and we wish to thank these national supporters as well. So let's just get started. So why carve out time to talk about regenerative agriculture? What is it, and how is it the same and or different from organic or conventional farming methods? In agricultural circles, and now more and more in the mainstream media, including green capitalism magazines, even Netflix films, I'm sure you've seen, the term regenerative agriculture is surfacing. And yet with it not being regulated by any standard or by third-party audits, there is the opportunity for it to be co-opted or greenwashed. So we must really ask ourselves, are there ways for the term to fulfill its inherent promise of genuine regeneration? So why is regenerative agriculture getting such attention? So the key answer here is carbon sequestration, which is the process of capturing and then removing carbon from the atmosphere and then depositing it in the agricultural soil's reservoir. So with the climate crisis evident on every continent, global systems are out of balance. Agricultural methods that focus on healthy living soils hold huge promise for their ability to impact climate crisis. And so even with these overwhelming and complex challenges facing humanity today, the soil appears to be right under our feet. It all starts in the soil. So let's turn the floor over to our expert panelists and listen to their hopes and concerns for regenerative agriculture and where we can go next. So we welcome 4 speakers today. We kind of have a really great format, and it's going to run for about 45 minutes with some wiggle room at the end. We're going to get some great highlights, and we certainly anticipate it will spur on and inspire folks to go learn even more. So here's the format. We're going to ask 3 questions to each panelist, and the 3 topics are the definition of regenerative agriculture, interpretations of tilling the land. Tillage is a big part of the regenerative discussion, and the use of chemicals. So the webinar participants, thank you very much again for attending. You're welcome to use the chat feature. And it's at the very end of the session where we'll do some Q&A. So Caroline will help us by tracking the chat. And if we miss any of your questions, we certainly anticipate and invite you to connect with CODA after the session. So let me introduce the speakers. Andrew Hammermeister is the Director of the Organic Agriculture Centre of Canada. And is an associate professor in the Faculty of Agriculture at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. Andrew is the science director for the Organic Science Cluster for Organic Agricultural Research in Canada. And he's going to start us all off with a biological definition of soil, and that will get the discussion going. We have Dag Falck, who worked for 14 years as an organic inspector before joining Nature's Path in 2003. He's had an opportunity to work across the whole organic sector with many aspects, including regulations, enforcement, supply chain, and even customer expectations. He supervises Legend Organic Farm, which is the first regenerative organic certified farm in Canada. Antonious Petro, welcome. He's the co-director of Regeneration Canada. He's a master's candidate in soil sciences at Université de Québec, where his research focuses on microbial activity and soil carbon sequestration. He farmed cotton, corn, and raised buffaloes and goats before he immigrated to Canada to pursue his dream of bringing life back to the soils. And we have Elizabeth Whitlow, who is the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance and oversees the revolutionary certification program called Regenerative Organic Certified, or ROC, or sometimes known as ROC even. She has spent nearly 25 years working in organic and animal welfare certification programs, and now speaks widely, including has a recent TEDx Tyson's talk, which you may have seen, and places like Falck in Germany. So let's get started with Andrew. He's going to show us some slides, and he's going to talk about the biological definition of soil. And really the question is, Andrew, what's the difference between soil and dirt? So pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kim. And it's definitely a pleasure to be here today. So what is soil? A classic textbook definition would indicate that it's a dynamic natural body at the surface of the earth composed of mineral and organic solids, gases, liquids, and living organisms, which can serve as a medium for plant growth. But the story of soils in Canada really begins with the retreat of the continental glaciers some 10,000 years ago. This retreat left behind the mineral materials in the form of sand, silt, clay, gravel, and stones, sometimes mixed together and sometimes sorted by water and wind. These materials contain nutrients which support the growth of plants. And the plants do use these mineral nutrients to grow and capture carbon through photosynthesis. These plants and the carbon that they captured become the food for creatures both above and below ground. And as they lived and died, their carbon is captured in the soil as rich, dark, organic matter. Essentially, all life depends upon the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. And certainly the soil contains life, supporting an estimated 25% of the world's biodiversity. We're just beginning to understand how the billions of organisms in a handful of soil interact with each other and with plants as a community below ground. The combination of mineral material modified by the climate, the shape of the landscape, and biology over time have resulted in distinct ecosystems such as forests, prairies, and wetlands. Each of these ecosystems have unique soils in terms of their physical, chemical, biological, and biochemical properties. The properties are essentially a record of the ecology of an area over millennia. A rainbow of soil is under our feet, red as a barn and black as peat. It's yellow as lemon and white as the snow, bluish gray, so many colors below. Hidden in darkness as thick as the night, the only rainbow that can form without light. Dig you a pit or bore you a hole, you'll find enough colors to well rest your soul. Francis Hole. As humans, we have used the soil to serve our needs, primarily through food supply by agriculture. Plowed ground smells of earthworms and empires, says Isherwood. And certainly civilizations have prospered on the foundation of fertile soils that have fed societies. But civilizations have also failed as a result of the degradation of the soils from overgrazing, salinization, nutrient depletion, and wind or water erosion. This has contributed to global challenges of agricultural pollution, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, climate change, and of course, hunger. We must recognize soils as being multifunctional, not only providing us with food and other resources, but also capturing carbon, mitigating climate change, being a home for many of the other organisms that we share the planet with, and many more services that it provides. But let us not just think of the soil for how it can serve us. Rather, let us appreciate it as an entity of itself. For only rarely have we stood back and celebrated our soils as something beautiful and perhaps even mysterious. For what other natural body worldwide in its distribution has so many interesting secrets to reveal to the patient observer? For in the end, we will conserve only what we love, and we will love only what we understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. That was really a wonderful definition. And I see that the last slide, that's your background. So that's wonderful to see. Thank you. So let's, now that we have that foundation and, maybe pun-wise, common ground, let's move into the questions. So basically, the first question will be answered in sequence by folks. So we'll be Dag first, then Antonious, and then Elizabeth. And here's the question. There is a lot of buzz about the term regenerative. What does regenerative agriculture mean from your perspective, since there is no one set definition or standard? So Dag, please.
Yes. Well, I think the term itself kind of tells us what it should mean. It says to regenerate. And we know that we've been familiar with the term sustainability for a long time now. And to sustain something means to keep it going the way it is, maintain it at the level it's functioning. But regeneration means to have a continuous process of it becoming better, improving itself, becoming healthier, more balanced, more like an ecosystem that's self-sustaining, but continuously becoming more self-sustaining. And so that's kind of what to me the term regeneration means. So it's treating the soil, when we're talking about agriculture, it's treating the soil so that it regenerates itself continuously. It is interesting that we have no definition or many definitions, but they're quite weak definitions. The ones that I've been able to find out anyway from the many groups that are using the term regenerative agriculture. And so other than the ROC, or the Regenerative Organic Certification Program, there is no standard and there's no very clear definition, but they do have that. And so we're going to hear more about that today, of course. And so there's been lots of claims and excitement about this concept of addressing climate change through regenerative agriculture by locking carbon into the soil. And there's been claims made for millions of acres being transitioned into regenerative agriculture. And General Mills has made a claim for 1 million acres by 2030. PepsiCo has their whole supply chain is supposed to be regenerative by that time. Cargill have, I think, several million acres with the same time frame. And there all of these different claims that companies are making now that they are going to have regenerative. There is no clear definition, or we don't know what it means, what they mean when they say it. So there's a great opportunity for confusion for consumers. What is this going to mean? I think for consumers and for all of us, for humans on the earth, the point is we want to reverse climate change. And if regenerative agriculture can be a part of doing that, we want that to be applied in a way that it actually accomplishes that, not just saying it. It's not about the words here, it's about the actions that are going to result in reversing climate change. So I think we all have to be on the lookout for greenwashing or the opportunists that want to get in on the storytelling and the opportunity to look better than they may be on the ground. And so that's what we have to balance here. Talking versus action. That's from me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dag. And so Antonious, please, from your point of view, what does regenerative agriculture mean to you?
Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you, Dag, for setting the table for that. I think for us at Regeneration Canada, it's important that we agree or understand that regeneration is a journey and not a destination. So the first element for a definition is regenerative agriculture is a journey. So the term regenerative, as I just said, refers to the process of improving one state. With regenerative agriculture, the journey improves the state of the soil, of the ecosystem overall, of the climate, and of the human health. So now regenerative agriculture is based on principles of land management, which reverse the current trends of soil degradation and water and air low quality by enhancing the soil ecosystem and starting by restoring its biology. It's also important to note for us that regenerative agriculture is founded in ancestral and traditional principles practiced by indigenous communities around the world and backed by modern science. So the principles of regenerative agriculture really aim to draw atmospheric carbon down into the soil and in the above ground biomass, but also that restores biodiversity, improves the water cycle, and create more nutrient dense food. And then all that while generating economic or having greater economic viability of for our farmers and range. So I think the first misunderstanding that we see a lot is just talking about regenerative agriculture as a synonym to farming to sequester carbon or carbon farming. This is one eco-service, maybe the most volatile one, but as I just mentioned, there's other ecosystem services that regenerative agriculture actually render to the whole ecosystem. And going back to your question about the definition at Regeneration Canada, we're actually on the very fundraising phase for a project that will facilitate a nationwide dialogue among farmer associations, scientists, and other stakeholders to align ourselves toward a definition or multiple definition of regenerative agriculture in Canada, because we talk about soil and it's all depending on the geoclimatic condition and the soil type. So we're hoping that this alignment will help leverage the movement and better communicate the message to funders and government and other and general public in general, but also to be able to hold accountable those who claim that they're transforming their whole operation to regenerative agriculture. So yes, there is no one definition. We might end having several definitions for Canada, but we're really excited to start this processes of just aligning ourselves to come up with one or more definition where everybody feels comfortable and really feeling ownership over it to help us leverage the movement in Canada.
Okay, thanks, Antonious. That's a wonderful introduction to Regeneration Canada for the group. So thank you very much. It sort of tells us it's a process on your end. Elizabeth, same question your way.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and thanks to the panelists and to Andy for the great introductions and setting the stage on regenerative and concepts and definitions of regenerative ag. I work with the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and the Alliance was founded by the Rodeo Institute, Patagonia Company, and Dr. Bronner's, and I'm actually zooming in here today from the Rodeo Institute, sitting in J.I. Rodeo's library, in fact. So feels like a really great time to be talking to you all about our approach and our idea of how to define this really powerful term, because really Robert Rodale was attributed with first using this term, although many say that it was first introduced by Dr. George Washington Carver. The Regenerative Organic Alliance exists to promote regenerative organic as the highest standard for organic or for agriculture in the world. And our framework is really rooted in these regenerative practices. Both regenerative ag and the practices that define it are certainly not modern creations. Truly, it's a collection of practices that focus on regenerating soil health and a full farm ecosystem. And these practices come from traditional and indigenous practices throughout the globe. And our result of individuals farming is part of a natural system and approaching it in a very holistic way, as far as just looking at the entire community of living beings on a farm, whether you're talking about the microbiome, the living biome in the soil, the animals that are raised on the land, and the people that are farming it. We want to look at it all as one kind of holistic unit. And really, I just want to touch on also the fact that we did attempt to define it, And you can find it on our website at regenorganic.org, where we have a framework, and it is called, as Dag referred to, the Regenerative Organic Certified, or the ROC. And this is a new certification, and it's for food, fiber, personal body care, agricultural ingredients. And this whole, we've done it for about 3 years now, our pilot program of testing it out. We have 3 pillars in the ROC framework, and that is soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness for farmers and farm workers. We really established this program in order to protect the term regenerative, because there was a fear of this, the risk of greenwashing this term by corporate interests who might seize upon this as another powerful term. We've seen a lot of consumers looking to this because they're looking for something more. They're looking for something that will assure them that their purchase makes a positive impact at every level, at environmental, ethical, and social levels. And so we've created this standard. This is our first year of operations, and we're learning a lot. We've had a lot of interest, a lot of applications. It's a really high bar standard, very aspirational. And it really is meant to demonstrate and clarify what regenerative can and should be. And that's a holistic type of agriculture that regenerates resources and considers all the players in the farm system, as I mentioned, from the soil microbiome to the animal to the workers. We also believe that regenerative and organic should always go together. And that's why it's called the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and why we call it Regenerative Organic Certified. And I think we're going to get another question here in a little bit that will get more into that aspect. So I will turn it back to you for that, Kim.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. That's great. We can see that that there's so much to talk about, and our panelists are doing such an amazing job at making it concise and bringing us the highlights and really piquing our interest and giving us a sense of what the key concepts are. So one of the concepts has been around tillage. So here's the question. There's been a lot of talk about moving to no-till. So from your own unique perspectives, please speak to why tillage is an important or not desirable in relation to regenerative practices. So Dag, we'll give that to you first.
All right, yeah, great question. So looking at tillage, we have to look at it in the context of healthy soil. And healthy soil is soil with microorganisms that are living in a balanced ecosystem and flourishing. And healthy soil is pretty much synonymous with soil with a lot of carbon, because carbon being present in soil is part of what makes it healthy for the microorganisms to live. So if you go back in history and look at tillage, to understand it, the first agriculture that was ever done by humans, when we went from hunter-gathering to agriculture, somebody scratched the soil with a stick and found a native plant and got the seed off of it and planted the seed there on purpose. And if they wouldn't have scratched the soil with a stick, or whatever, who knows what they had at the time, but they wouldn't, that seed wouldn't have been able to germinate if they just threw it on top of the ground where it was already covered with grasses and other plants. And so tillage and disturbing of the soil is the tool that has made agriculture possible. And that's been true right up to the Industrial Revolution, where agrochemicals were introduced, invented, I guess, and used to, and some of those chemicals were able to replace the function of tillage. So when we look at tillage, we have to look at what are the functions, and today's agriculture, and certainly in organic, there's several purposes, and I'll just cover a few of them. It's preparing a seed bed, like scratching the soil to prepare that soil so it's ready for that seed to germinate without a lot of competition from the grasses or weeds or whatever plants were already growing there. So it's clearing the land from all the other competition and planting seeds and giving that crop seed the best chance of coming up and being not being competed out before it even starts. And then it's for weed control. So between crops, between cash crops, you can control the weeds by tilling the soil to reduce the weed seed bank in the soil. And there's several methods of this and how that's done. And then there's fertility, and that's when you grow a what we call green manure crop, or sometimes also known as cover crop, and it's tilled back under into the soil. And that becomes like a feeding of the microorganisms in the soil. So you're basically taking some green material that's grown to, to 6 inches or 8 inches or a foot tall, and you're turning it under into the soil, and that becomes like a salad for the microorganisms. So it feeds them, and so it creates a great boost of activity in the microorganisms in the soil, and that results in increased fertility. So it's a tool for creating fertility naturally. Now, by taking that tool away, which chemical agriculture was able to do by preparing the seed bed, so to speak, with chemicals, but not preparing the seed bed, but preparing the field to reduce the possibility of competition by weeds, by spraying something like glyphosate on the field, killing all living forms of plants, and then seeding directly into it. And then that seed now has a chance to get up and compete without weeds being all around it. It'll take a long time for those weeds to get back up and compete. And so that was able to replace tillage. But until then, there was no example of large-scale farming where tillage was able to be displaced, like not used. So I think we need to look at how to find a balanced way to still use some tillage and be very, very conscious of the purpose of the tillage, and be very, very conscious of the negative downside of tillage, because there are downsides, and that is that the microbial life forms in the soil, they bounce back pretty quickly after tillage. But the fungal organisms that live in the soil, which are very important in the ecosystem in the soil, they get shredded basically, and they take a lot longer time to regrow and reestablish. And so that's the harm that can be done by tillage. So we have to be careful about how deep we go, how often we go, for what purpose. Are we doing something to mitigate that negative effect? Are we creating, do we have perennial plants nearby where that storehouse of mycelia and fungal life forms can reintroduce itself? There's all these, it's quite a fascinating topic to think about.
Yes.
How we can do that. And,
Yes.
and I'm going to end there. So thank you.
It is fascinating, and I know that we can go on, and it's something to encapsulate. It's so many great insights there, Dag. Thank you so much. In our next question, we are going to talk about the role of chemicals or the role of pesticides. So I'm going to ask Antonious to take us on his journey. As he mentioned, regenerative agriculture is a journey. And why is tillage important or not desirable in relation to regenerative practices? Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. As maybe Kim just mentioned at the very beginning, I come from a country, I'm from Egypt originally, and Egypt has been tilling the soil for thousands of years. And as you just said, tillage has been a powerful tool for farmer that really enabled them to control weed, turn organic matter into the soil, and thus accelerate or enhance the decomposition rate, but also to incorporate other soil amendments and sometimes even for compaction. And what regenerative agriculture suggests are just different tools to carry out these functions that I just listed while reducing soil erosion and increasing soil carbon sequestration and enhancing the soil biology, among other ecosystem services. But these environmental and sometimes economic gains of the no-till are, while they're well documented, they really depend largely again on the geoclimatic condition and the soil type. And in a vast country like Canada, we need to be careful when we talk about these gain. And sometimes we actually observe no difference in between the two systems, especially when we we talk about soil carbon sequestration in a humid climate like Eastern Canada. So again, the second maybe misunderstanding that we hear a lot is like regenerative agriculture is all about no-till and cover crops, which is not. I think everybody here would agree that it's in a fully regenerative system, all principles of regenerative agriculture should be in place, and that includes reducing or eliminating pesticides. So I think the decision about tilling or not isn't really an easy one. There are organic farmers all around the world and in Canada that have been innovating, trying to do no-till or to reduce to the maximum their tillage without, of course, using any chemical input or pesticide. But I can't agree more how Doug just put it. It's a balance. We need first to know that farmers sometimes need support and need tools and we need the research. We need the thorough research for that. But also at the end of the day, they have objectives and they have yield to reach. And it's a journey. As a part of regenerative agriculture, going from a heavy tillage to no-till without herbicides, it's a hell of a journey, and it takes time. But again, I think the key word here is a balance. Do we need to till? And if we do, how much, how deep, and how often? Again, keeping in mind that the golden standard would be that together, society, scientists, agronomists, and farmers, we come to find solutions that enabled our farmers and ranchers to do no-till, but without herbicides.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. And it's a good entree for Elizabeth to talk about the tillage, and it's also a good entree to the third and last question when we get there in terms of the use of chemicals. So Elizabeth, why is tillage important or not desirable in relation to regenerative practices?
Sure. It sounds like we are all really pretty aligned on this topic. And, I think first and foremost, we need to consider the fact that we are losing topsoil at unprecedented rates. Scientists estimate the equivalent of 30 soccer fields per minute, I believe it is. So, 1,000 soccer fields in the time that we've all been here on this call. They say we have 60 harvests left at the current rate of topsoil erosion, and that this, will continue to contribute to climate change. And we've also learned that soil has this enormous potential to sequester carbon, and that agriculture can actually be a solution instead of the problem. And a lot of it comes down to tillage. And if you're over-tilling or tilling very aggressively, that is not going to be something that fits in the regenerative model. At the same time, tillage is a really critical tool for farmers to use, especially organic farmers. It's a very necessary tool in their otherwise pretty limited toolbox. So, we have to be, when the ROC framework first came out, it was all about no-till, and there was kind of an uproar from the farming community, as you can imagine, because they have to use some form of tillage. And so then we changed it to conservation tillage, and since then, we went through our pilot and had a lot of feedback from different farmers. And DAG actually was a very strong advocate and vocal member of our Soil Health Advisory Council or task force. And so where we landed after that was at, what is the core principle? What's the intention here? It's to minimize the soil disturbance so that you don't destroy the soil microbiome. And so I think, for us, that's really the heart of it, is using tillage in a way that is judicious and appropriate to the situation. You have to incorporate those green manures. And so if you just do it as a tertiary kind of top level to feed the microbiome, then you're going to continue to build organic soil organic matter, and provide more housing for the soil microbiome. So it's really a win-win. And there's still very emergent fields of study happening too. And I think that's where a lot of extension and agronomists and land grant universities down here can, and Rodeo Institute is doing this very much, is to help the farmers to do the research and help them learn ways to cope with weeds without using pesticides and without having to use tillage. So yeah, I think we're all pretty much aligned on this. And so I can keep my answer pretty short. Maybe one last thing, it's just what we do to the soil, we do to ourselves. It's the bedrock of our food system and ultimately our culture and our civilization. And so degrading the soil will threaten our entire way of life. And I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yes, to hear that there are, an estimated 60 harvests left, that's something that is pretty mind-blowing. And in talking about this regenerative agriculture, it's definitely between, as you say, the three of you have said, there's a lot of alignment, and the idea of working cooperatively to make sure that there are really substantial definitions are great. In fact, we have a question in our chat, which I do encourage our participants to keep on loading up the chat with your questions. We'll get to them at the very end. So we will get to that question around the rock certification and organic. So our third question, what is your perspective on the use of pesticides in relation to soil health? So pesticides are often, we say here at CODA, like encompass a bunch of stuff, herbicides, fungicides, and so forth. So it's like the big sort of chemical bucket. So Dag, I'll give that one to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so obviously, working with Nature's Path and with organic, obviously I'm committed to farming without pesticides, and I kind of lump chemical fertilizers pretty closely into that as well, because it has not every fertilizer, but many fertilizers has a similar effect on the soil, on the healthy soil. And so that's the issue for me. I mean, so we have a way of farming without it. So that's one thing, but the conventional farmers that are talking about being regenerative, that are using those chemicals as a tool, my feeling on that is that it's a big risk for them to call it regenerative, because it isn't, in my view, it isn't really regenerative. It's not a regenerative system if you're using tools that strongly work against your objectives. And there's lots of studies that show that nitrogen fertilizer, for instance, has a very detrimental effect on on soil microorganisms like bacteria. They overfeed on it. They try to transform it. This strange substance that they're not used to. They try to transform it, and they can't. They have difficulty doing that, and they expire in the process. And with pesticides, lots of pesticides are shown to have a negative effect on the microorganisms in the soil. So I think the risk of calling a system regenerative, while it's transitioning towards that perhaps, but it's still using those tools, the risk of that is that it gives an opportunity for greenwashing, because some players may want to continue to use the chemical farming system and call it regenerative and benefit from the halo that gives them. Looks like they're doing something for the earth. It looks like they're taking responsibility. Meanwhile, they may only be doing it to capture the name regenerative and get to benefit from that. And they may not be focusing on reducing or eliminating the chemical use. And so by allowing regenerative to be called, allowing something to be called regenerative whilst it's still kind of hooked on the chemical treadmill, to me is not the right way. It's not what should be happening, but that is currently what's happening. Thanks.
All right. Okay, thanks, Dag. That's great. That's gives us a good platform to move on. Antonious, what's your perspective on the use of pesticides in relation to soil health?
Yeah, I think by now the huge majority of us here in Canadian know the harmful impact of pesticide on soil and plant health, but also on our own health. But we're still also lacking more understanding, more long-term research about the effect of pesticide usage and soil chemical, physical, and biological properties, to examine these claims about the necessity of using such a product. So yes, lots of research and studies shown that even after transition, these produce could stay in the soil for more than 45 years after transitioning to organic, for example. But we're still, the science is still at its very beginning, and also, you know, it's sometimes hard to do this while lots of the fund comes from people whose interest is not to unreveal this. That said, using pesticide has also been an important tool for farmers for decades. So while, again, we should always aim for the golden standard, which for me and for Regeneration Canada would be growing regeneratively with no synthetic input, no pesticide, I think we still need to meet farmers where they are and to provide them with the tools and support on their journey towards a more regenerative system. So I think if we're talking about soil health, the balance between applying pesticides every now and then, every 5 years sometimes, versus heavy tillage, it's a very tricky decision, and and I think lots of people on this panel would agree. That's not to say that we shouldn't aim for that. Again, we should aim to eliminate that. Now, while we don't have a definition or a certification, I think at least at Regeneration Canada, where we consider people who on this journey are in the journey towards regeneration, because we believe that there is no such a thing like 100% regenerative ecosystem. Otherwise, would have not been having this discussion here today. But again, it's only when biodiversity below and above ground is restored, and when we're having living roots all year round, and when you have carbon back into soil, that we really can not depend on pesticides and other chemical inputs to produce our food. So I think I'm going back to my point about regenerative agriculture as a journey, and I think even with all these claims, we're still at the very beginning. And the fear of the movement being co-opted needed some reflection and maybe protection, but also it needs more application and more vertical application of these practices, so we can actually bring it to a critical mass by which no one can really play or co-opt the movement.
Great, thank you. Do you want to have any other kind of comment there? Okay, great. So thanks a lot, Antonious. You were trying to show us about this transitionary kind of like, process, I guess. So thank you. Do you want to have any final comment? I kind of interrupted your last concept there. Okay, great.
No, thanks.
Okay, so Elizabeth, it's on to you now to wrap up our third question, which is your perspective on the use of pesticides in relation to soil. Thank you.
Yeah, I think pesticide in relation to soil health is actually completely at odds in many ways, that there's not a positive relationship between pesticides and the health of the soil, the humans, or the workers. We are currently struggling with super weeds. If you all have seen the news recently here in the US anyway, that we've got these super weeds that are proving to be incredibly resistant to these super pesticides or herbicides. And the same with the pests. We've got pests that are really tenacious, and they require more and more applications of pesticides. The only ones winning in this game are the corporations that produce those pesticides. And so we believe that regenerative and organic are intrinsically linked. And that's why the ROC program requires that anyone who enters into the ROC program is already certified organic as a baseline. And so, I think that one aspect is really important to point out for us. We are taking a very strong stance, and it's not that we don't want to be in a very big tent with everybody and try and move everybody along this pathway. Here in the US, 1% of our farmland is managed organically. So there's 99% of the land, there's opportunity to transition towards using less pesticides and implementing more organic and regenerative organic methods of farming. And, with our program, the whole concept is that the soil health is restored through practices like cover cropping, leaving a vegetative cover on the ground, through really more ambitious kind of requirements, or aggressive requirements, I guess, on crop rotation, the low or no-till, the use of compost, and then zero use of persistent chemical pesticides and fertilizers. So we feel like by requiring these practices, and also encouraging other things like the planting of perennials and the development of pollinator habitats and hedgerows, and incorporating agroforestry and vegetative barriers and all kinds of other regenerative practices, that these are going to continue to contribute to the development of the soil organic matter. And by improving the soil health with this increased presence of soil organic matter, prohibiting the use of pesticides, that it'll lead to a restoration of the soil microbiome and really help control pests. It brings pests into balance. So pests are often the result of low biodiversity. So having these more healthy, biologically diverse farms will remove the need for the use of the destructive pesticides. And if you all have seen the movie, The Biggest Little Farm, it's a great movie. And that farm was actually a participant in our pilot, and it really illustrates the story. It brings it home beautifully. So I'd highly recommend that movie. And I think I can stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, we have such a wealth of insight, and so thank you very much. And Elizabeth's answer really makes me think about the particulars. There's lots of tools in the toolbox, even though, and that's one way to see organic in terms of the toolbox. So one of the questions I'm going to come down to, I'm going to poke over here to the chat, and folks, we're just going to mute everyone. Thank you. Just going to jump into some of the questions here in the chat, so you can pop some stuff in there if you wish. I do want to just, I thought it would be a good sort of transition one to ask about the tillage, because Elizabeth was mentioning all these different kind of actions that can be taken on behalf of the farmers. The farmers do stuff, they're actively engaged in doing things. And it says here, we talk about tillage as it's universally known that it's not good for soil health. Isn't there some research to suggest that tillage, just like rotational grazing, can also be beneficial? I'm going to give that question to Elizabeth, and if Antonious and Dag want to jump in, you're welcome to.
Yes, definitely. I felt like we did address that, and from my perspective, that we started off with this no-till concept, and we learned, pretty quickly that that is not the only answer, that actually judicious use of tillage is really important for organic farmers as one of the only tools in their toolbox. And as Jeff Moyer, he's the executive director here at the Rodale Institute, likes to say, can consider any tool. You could take a hammer and you could smash the window to bits, or you can take a hammer and you can build up a house with it. Like, it's just like, how do you use that tool? And I think Nature's Path, Dag, they have done some research on this as well, so maybe he would want to speak to it. But yeah, I don't think, my intention was not to say that tillage is a bad thing, or there's no positive ends for that.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. Dag, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks for that, Elizabeth. Well, the Organic Center did a study on, they sampled soils across North America for carbon and the markers for carbon. And they sampled conventional soils and organic soils, and they compared the two in terms of how much carbon was captured in the soil. And they found that organic was the system that had captured the most carbon of any farming system, and that included traditional, conventional, if you can even say such a thing, but conventional farming with tillage. And then they also sampled no-till conventional, where they had eliminated tillage, and then they sampled organic. And organic was found to consistently have more carbon in it. And this study was done before the conversation had really started, or was in the early part of the regenerative conversation. So the farms that they had sampled were certified organic, not certified regenerative organic. And so they were practicing tillage the way they always had in organic. And yet, even with that, they had sequestered more carbon. So to me, that's a study that shows that the organic premise of farming, including the use of tillage, is still better in sequestering more carbon than any other farming system that we know of. So that was really, really encouraging to me. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to become even better. I think that perhaps by focusing our attention on judicious tillage, we might be able to improve that picture even more. But it was very heartening to see that what we're doing is working. And there's other studies as well, but that's the one that I thought was, you can find it by going to the Organic Center, TOC, the Organic Center, and
Great.
to their website, and you can find that and several other studies there.
Super. For equal opportunity, Antonious, do you want to comment on the tillage question, or should we move on to another question? Move ahead. Okay.
Can move on.
All right, super. Well, I see the time. We're soon going to wrap up. So there's a couple of questions that are a little bit more about funding and politics and so forth. How do we ensure that regenerative organic farmers benefit from various programs? Thanks, Caroline, for that. And we have an election happening next Monday. And are any of the parties really working towards those things? Is it on anyone's agenda? I think we'll just leave those in the chat. I did want to kind of acknowledge them. And the idea here is that, is there a plan to, what's the Canada-wide scale for regeneration, regenerative agriculture? Is there a plan to ban and regenerate on Canada-wide scale? Is there any comment? Those kind of go into like the mechanisms or the political scheme, or what is, how are we able to move ahead? Does anyone want to take those types of ones on? Those questions?
I can offer some easy answer. I think, as I think Elizabeth said, it's regenerative agriculture is a holistic process and needs holistic efforts from different stakeholders and different groups fighting in different fronts. And if I can't agree more with the comment that we need to ban these products in Canada as soon as possible, and that there are lots of groups out there who are fighting. They're activists. This is what they're good at, and we also see that there is need for a group like ourselves and group like in Dakota and all the other organizations on this panel to do their job, just to making sure that while we're talking about huge transition and banning, that we're not losing the heart and center of all this conversation, which are our farmers and ranchers. So I think we're saying we have the same objectives, and we're just dividing the work between ourselves depending on our set of skills. But we need everybody's voice and effort and connection to move this forward. This is what I just wanted to share with you.
Okay, Elizabeth and Dag, do you want to respond to that, and then we'll wrap up the we'll wrap it up?
I would love to.
Okay.
I think it's a really great question, and it's it's really the politics, it's the lobbyists, it's the influence from these huge multinational agrochemical companies who influence the way our policies go. And it's certainly down here in the US, and maybe it's not the same in Canada, but our current food system, the USDA, it supports by far the production of cheap calories. And it's this idea that farmers are duped into thinking they're supposed to feed the world. They're feeding the world corn and soy. And that's what they grow primarily. And the corn and soy is really used for livestock feed in other countries or for ethanol. And it's, it's externalizing these costs of the production of those Roundup ready corn and soy. And it's, the costs are being borne out on the environment and also on human health. And this kind of concept that our food should be cheap is the really flawed policy that we need to change our mindset about, and not lose sight of who grows our food, how it's grown, the impact it has on the people and the planet. And food is supposed to support human health and make people healthy and support better well-being. And instead, we have a nation of people with diet-related illnesses that are relating directly to their diets. And we spend trillions and trillions of dollars on that. And so there's just a lot of influence there, and it's a very polarized political environment. So I think a lot of it comes down to that, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dag, do you want to have a final word here? And then we're going to wrap up. Yeah,
I just want to kind of pick up on the question about, how come it's not on our politicians' radar kind of thing, the regenerative agriculture. And, it would be good if it was, and I think it will become more of an issue. And, we sort of had this election thrown in our face, right? So we weren't as prepared probably as we would have been. And I think that many of the groups involved with regeneration would have lobbied and brought the term forward and pushed it into the election conversation. They didn't do that this time, but they did bring in climate change, of course, and environment. So that's gonna happen. But the risk is, again, because of those forces being largely in control over our governments, or they, whatever way you want to express that, they seem to be favoring the large industries that are supplying the agrochemicals, for instance. And to go against that is expensive or difficult. There's a lot of forces to try to stop you from doing that. And politicians are aware of that. Being a politician is partly a popularity contest, right? So you have to have the votes, and you have to be popular, and you can't defend large numbers of people because you'll lose your votes. So they might want to use the term regenerative agriculture once they realize that may have currency with their voters. But then will they use it in a genuine way, or will it become just a talking point that maybe doesn't carry a lot of weight in terms of action? So those are the risks I see going forward. But without us doing anything, climate change is going to become more and more a part of the political discussions in the landscape. And they will be coming to us to seek answers, because they will know that we have experience in this field, organic, and especially now organic and regenerative. And so we need to be prepared for mainstream approaching us and saying, what do you know? What do you got to contribute? And how do you want to play with us on this? What can you help us with? And we need to be ready for that, because it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a big way.
That's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you so much to Dag Falck, Antonious Petro, and Elizabeth Whitlow for helping us kind of shape this conversation. And we really appreciate you sharing your insights in trying to make agriculture friendly to the earth. We thank everyone for your questions in the chat. Some of them we got to, some we bunched together. So I do want to suggest to the folks on the call, there were some websites mentioned or whatever. I want to mention the Canada Organic Trade Association has a statement on regenerative agriculture. It's under what we do, advocacy key issues on our website. And as you might imagine, it takes a holistic kind of approach to this concept of regenerative agriculture. And because it draws from the kind of the complexities of nature itself. So I just want to leave you with this as we wrap up, as to say, this is what our statement says at the end. It says, organic has a long history of working towards global ecosystems health, and CODA welcomes the renewed focus brought by a collective look at regenerative practices in agriculture. With compassion and humility, we commit to sharing what we have learned on the organic path thus far and embracing new ideas that can shift humanity's impact on the soil and the health of our planet away from degenerative practices towards a more regenerative future. So thank you again for joining us. Please stay tuned with all the other great Organic Week activities that are happening. And you can check out organicweek.ca for more info and to join our other sessions. And please save the date, November 22nd to 26th is our Organic Summit, and there'll be lots of very interesting topics. Our topic is the future of food is organic. So we welcome everyone to put that on your calendars and get ready for some pretty amazing thinking and kind of generating just new creative ways of looking at things. So we thank you very much for staying with us for the time period. Thank you so much to our speakers and sharing your perspectives. Very, very welcome. Information that we have received, and I wish you all the best and a very good Organic Week.
And
thank you for having us.
Kim, for facilitating. Very good.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everybody.